Okay, thank you. Good morning. And welcome to the Trade, Commerce, and Tourism Committee. It's Wednesday, April 21st, 2010. We have one item this morning that has to do with our airports.
Item 1 is consideration of motion Parks Han, introduced on February 5th of this year, which cites 3 examples in which the Federal Aviation Administration ruled that our Department of Airports, or LAWA, has used airport revenue funds for prohibited purposes. The motion argues that these 3 incidents, quote, show a consistent pattern of the city's misinterpretation of FAA funding guidelines, resulting in FAA requirements that the city repay the diverted airport funds to LAWA. The motion proposes, therefore, that the CAO and the CLA report to Council with a financial policy that would prevent any future misinterpretations of FAA funding guidelines by requiring that any newly funded program, personnel request, equipment, or services provided to LAWA by the city, presumably meaning city departments that are funded through the general fund, must be pre-approved by the FAA before any agreement is signed by the city and Los Angeles World Airports. We do have today with us staff of Councilman Park's office, as well as the LAWA staff and CAO and CLA staff.
Okay, you all want to come forward?
And the CAO and CLA would want to defer first to airports to describe the procedure that they typically follow in this type of situation, where we would be working with FAA funds or seeking city services.
Okay. Hi, Sampson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having us. Before I get into some of the controls that's specific to the motion, let me very quickly review the FAA's compliance review that was done in 2008, and the final findings were made later in the year. In the summer of 2008, the FAA approached us and said that they will be doing a compliance review. They do these things randomly at the various airports.
When was the last time we had one?
In the mid-'90s.
Okay.
Yeah, so 10 years. And in fact, it's not uncommon for airports to go 20, 25 years before any such review.
All rise for the Honorable Bernard Parks. We just got started. We're just hearing from the airport. Okay.
Wait, Councilman. I just started getting into the 2000 review. When they arrived, they tagged 14 specific areas that they would want to review. And although the adverse finding on one of the 14 was impactful to all of us, and especially to the city, the 13 others, there were no adverse impacts or adverse findings in that the things we've been doing and in our documentation, they found to be sufficient and in compliance.
What was the one?
The one has to do with our contractual relationship with LA Inc.
Right.
In marketing and promotions. Even in that, the federal rules are very clear that promotions and marketing are permissible, except there are some nuances.
Right.
And promotions to the airport and the airport's amenities are permissible. General promotions to a destination,
right,
for like a Disneyland,
right,
those they're found to be not permissible.
Right.
Although the argument has been that people going to Disneyland have to go through the airport.
Right.
So those are the nuances that were in a gray
right.
area. In addition to that, the issue was the documentation. And in fact, the preliminary finding in September of 2008 said that all the expenditure was not permissible because they didn't find the documentation sufficient enough. So it is after that, after some iteration, that we had the ultimate finding reduced what not to be permissible to 24% of the total expenditure. So what did we do? We very quickly took to our board of airport commissioners a change in the contract. What we would put in place was reduced the scope and the amount, but also put in very specific, very clear accounting system.
Right.
And took a very conservative approach for some of the things that were in the gray area. We reduced the charge from 100% in some cases to up to 25%.
Right.
So that's what was put in place. But aside from that, we have tightened all our other accounting systems, documentation, but also the review by the city attorney now has been streamlined so that the proper controls, the proper safeguards, we hope and we think are in place.
Now, this motion speaks to 3 recent incidents where, we had to pay, back the money. LAX Century Freeway, the CDD job training program, and this LA Inc. that you talked about. Can you speak to the other 2?
The Century Freeway goes back to 15 years. The various disputes, various rulings. It had to do initially when there was a $58 million that the airport transferred to the city that had to do with the purchase of some air rights and easements. Went from Caltrans to the airport coffers. And there was some findings, again, near 2000, some of the money was returned. The airlines and the airport aircraft operators and ATA continue with the complaints. So this was the final adjudication that these $2 million or so had to be returned.
And what about
to
the CDD job training? That was recently, right?
Right, but there was no expenditure attached to that, so there was no monies that we were asked to return or from the city.
We were just planning to, and that was part. Was that part of the community benefits agreement with the settlement?
Yes, it was.
Okay, but we never expended any
We never
money.
expended.
We just were planning to.
We were planning to.
Did we run that by them, or how was that, noticed or?
That was a very good example. Even going into the community benefit agreement, we knew there might be some questions.
Right.
And the agreement specifically had the language that pending FAA approval.
Right, okay.
And we, in fact, did go to the FAA and met with them, including the committee members, and ultimately said, this is not permissible. You have to make sure you cannot expend that. We were close to it because specific dollar amounts were identified into the community benefit agreement to about $3 million a year, and we never expended that money.
So total recently, how much money have we had to, quote, pay back that involved these 3 instances?
The total is about $20 million, including interest.
Okay. And how do we pay that money back?
We're going to get a credit on, Mark Adams, Los Angeles World Airports, we're going to get a credit on the city bill over a 10-year period, as I understand it. So it won't be one lump sum. There won't be a check cut, but the city bill amounts to about $50 million a year that we pay the city for various
Right.
services, police, fire, and other
Right.
things that are performed at the airport, and we'll just get a credit on that bill on an annual basis.
So on an annual basis.
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years, so $2 million a year.
Yeah.
So,
Actually,
okay,
the bulk of it is in the back 5 years, so about $1 million or so the first
so
5
the city
years.
of Los, we don't just take money out of our general fund and pay it back. It's just a credit.
That is correct.
Okay, so we don't get
What's due to
what's
you.
due to us,
Correct.
it's minus $1 million, you're saying.
That is correct.
Okay, and was that arrangement worked out with the FAA?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay. And I know, Bernard, I don't know if you want to
Yeah. You know,
speak.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
The reason that we came forward with this motion is that we've had a number of incidents, and generally, it's not the proprietaries that are creating this, it's the city. In looking at ways to extract money from the proprietaries, we've come up with programs, some of which were not well thought out, and then later, the general fund takes the hit by paying it back. And the issues that I'm concerned about is that the program that we had for the community benefits, we got very close. In fact, we'd already distributed the money through the city. We were arguing about where the money would go and found out that FAA had never approved it and they weren't going to approve it. But the other ones, and again, although we at times view that credit, getting a credit back isn't real money, it is real money, which $2 million that the general fund will not get for 10 years, over a 10-year period. We also were looking at expanding or asking to expand this to, we've had at least a couple of incidents, we hadn't had a chance to research them in the harbor, where I believe they're guided rather than by FAA, but by some Tidewater agreement.
State Lands Commission.
And so the issue is that we've created deals there where we subsequently had to pay them back, and that's another impact on the general fund. And you may recall, this is the one that, the issue we had for a number of years about the garden downtown.
Oh, yes.
The city imposed upon
Yes.
the harbor to buy
Yes.
a piece of land that was
Yes.
probably 3 times above its value.
Yes, and wasn't anywhere close to
And then
submerged
later,
tidelands.
and then later, it was sold.
Yes.
And the person that sold it initially wanted the right of first refusal.
right.
So they bought it for one third of what the harbor
Right.
paid for it.
Right, I
Those
remember
are the
that very
kinds
well.
of things that, in my judgment, we need to have some control on our effort. And these things occur when we're in a financial deficit. We're looking for, quote, creative ways to bring funds into the general fund, but we pay dearly with interest later. And so what I'm recommending is that we put some controls on the city, the CAO, the mayor's office, and the council to say, if we expand existing programs that have been proven, that's not an issue. But if we're going to go on a new venture and we're going to ask the or the harbor airports to pay for it, then we need to get the approvals ahead of time so that we have some security that 3 to 4 or 5 years from now, we're not cutting another settlement deal.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to
Right.
put some controls in it.
Let's talk about the FAA approval process. What does that look like? If now the community benefits one, it seems like that worked well. I mean, they sort of knew we were doing that. We asked for their approval. They seemed to, in a timely way, before we expended the funds.
But I think one of the things that the council, if I'm not mistaken, asked that be put in that language, that
Yeah. Yeah.
pending FAA approval.
Yeah.
We've not had that on each one of these deals, and that's what I think we have to deal with. And with the harbor, we have to put in pending approval so that we're not expending the money
Right.
and then having to pay it.
Well, I did that on the last big settlement on the TRAPAC terminal. We put that in the MOU, was must be approved by the State Lands Commission. So we wrote that language in there.
But I think we need it consistently as we get creative and create
Yeah.
some of these revenue streams,
Right.
that has to be language as a
Right.
financial policy ongoing, not just deal to deal.
Right, right. Does the airport have a problem with that potential language?
The
We're joined by Councilmember Tom LeBon, by the way, in his jeans.
the particular incident regarding this the jobs program,
Right.
that was handled at the highest level of the FAA. You may recall we joined with the community and we visited the administrator at the time, and this issue was high in their radar. And even with that kind of focus and energy, after exchanging information, it took close to a year for them to give us that determination. And again, this with the focus and energy at the highest level. But for routine items that we do with the city in terms of services,
Right.
it will not be practical to expect that we'd get a formal response from the FAA in a timely
manner.
In a timely manner. I've had a conversation with the FAA on this particular subject. Kindly, they said, well, that's not how we operate. That's not how we organize. Our responsibility is to educating you in what the requirements are. In a nice way, they told us, don't ask us to give you approval because, it may sit at their desk for a long, long time.
Mr. LeBon?
Well, I think Mr. Parks brings up a good point.
Yes, he does.
And were you talking about 42nd Central?
Whatever where the forum was.
Yeah,
I think it was,
42nd
yeah.
Central. All right. So I understand all that work. I almost think that for us to be, real estate, land, is the biggest value that probably the city holds. It has sometimes the wildest, like a cattle drive. I say that because you got denim on there like a good cowgirl and all that stuff. So that being a compliment too, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, that
I didn't know how to take that.
I think.
I think, all right, I got in trouble there,
No.
Bernard. All right, but this is important to take this step, so I support it. I also would like to say there should be a higher level authority in the city administrative office that oversees all this, that you could go to, on real estate, because the most important committee that I think is in the, and I don't think you're involved with it because you're a department outside of the preview of the city hall, but the Municipal Facilities Committee, which is the CAO, the Chief of Staff of the Mayor, and the CLA on land issues.
Right.
Because it's going to be, we need to consolidate some land, we need to, whatever we do, we got to do it right, and there's no new land. So I would say let's vote for this.
Well, this is not just about land. I mean, he was bringing up an example from the Harbor Department. This is really about the airport entering into new programs that the city could be reimbursed for. So it's not about land. It's about
The report I read is
new ventures, new programs that we get, like job training, like our LA Inc. We got into trouble with that.
And I think one of the things that, although the airport said there's nuances in this FAA requirement, I think when you read it, it's fairly clear how and where you spend the money, and we have a consistent pattern of eligible expenditures on the airport. It's when we venture out
Right.
into the city is where you need the safeguards.
Right. What kind of, short of putting that language in every time, what do you propose that can keep us on the straight and narrow when it comes to, using airport revenue for, admissible purposes, allowable purposes?
Yes, Councilman Parks is absolutely correct. About 98% of what we do in terms of the services is absolutely clear what's permissible, what's
Right.
not permissible.
Right.
But for those in the gray area, I think we take this seriously. We have to try and do more to give the council assurances. We can tighten the control in the area of creating accounting systems that will make the FAA more comfortable in their review. we can develop maybe a more elaborate checklist that we have to go through.
Okay.
And that the city attorney will need to be involved in a formal way in our
You have that, have you put together that so-called checklist yet, financial procedures, before a new contract between the airport and the city occurs?
We have not. We're
Okay.
just beginning to
Okay.
develop that. But that is another control that could be put in place. And if we can, in fact, adopt that as a policy, I'm sure our Board of Airport Commissioners will be supportive of that, and that can become a department policy.
Right. Well, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think Councilmember Parks does have, I mean, he's watching our money, he's watching our procedures, he's watching our accountability. And, you know, I don't know if I'm ready to say in every new contract that we have to have that language, but because you're trying to tell me that you think that is not feasible or the FAA doesn't want to do that, but we need something. Hello, Councilmember Rosendahl. We need something that can give us the assurance that before we enter into these, as Councilmember Parks says, new ventures, what safeguards do we have in place that, you know, will, you know, keep us from having to take this, you know, $1 million, $2 million hit, you know, even if it's a credit to the general fund.
See, I think it's two pieces, and I think their safeguards, they're going to have their checklist. But I think we have, as a council, have to give the CAO some clarity of because CLA and the CAO are the two that do most of our bidding for the city.
Yeah.
They have to have some guidelines to know that the
Right.
council wants them to assure
Yes.
these approvals
Right.
in place.
Right.
Because they're bringing us these proposals with the documents that say approve them.
Right.
And the thing is without that,
Right.
that safeguard,
Right.
they're guiding us down a path
Right.
that later they're sending the same report saying, oh, by the way, you're going to get $2
Right.
million less for the next
Right.
10 years.
Right.
So
Right.
they need some guidance. too.
Right. Well, so I think you're absolutely right. Why don't we? What I would ask is that you would work on these, you know, financial procedures with the CAO and the CLA and LAWA. You know, let's work on this for, you know, our CAO to know before they even bring this to us. Certain things have got, the criteria has to be met, has to be very strict. That's what I would like to ask, that you come back with that. So we can have a little more assurance on the fact that we're entering into contracts that will not be harmful to us in the future.
See, and I would hope that the CAO reports, when they come to us, would say that they've complied and that FAA has given approval or
Yeah.
something so that we
Yeah.
have that safeguard. That's
Right.
That's what we need.
I know, yeah, I see that. I see that's what I'm not sure we're going to get that FAA approval piece, but I think that's something we should work towards. Bill.
Well, first of all, let me ask my colleague, Mr. Parks, what's the intent of this motion?
The intent is not to get in a position to where we're paying back money years later on programs that were not either vetted or misinterpreted the FAA guidelines. And as before you got here, we were also mentioned to Ms. Hahn, we're in a similar situation in the harbor when we don't comply with the Tidewater agreements to where we're paying money back. And so we're saying that when the CAO and the CLA write reports to us and say, approve
Right,
this
right.
LA Inc. deal,
Right.
part of that report should say there's some assurance that the FAA has approved this, so that we're not for the next 10 years giving back $20 million. And because that's a general fund impact.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I have a real problem with the FAA for a lot of reasons. They're the pit bull of the Congress. The policymakers like we are here, that's our building and safety group, if you want to use an analogy of sorts. And the FAA does not listen to us, shows very little respect to us at our level. And I would not want to abdicate any of my opportunities, responsibilities, or timing in tying it into them. They're nobodies as far as I'm concerned. I'm so angry with that group out of Washington that I can barely sit still on it. Giving them the authority or giving them a role in this or a pocket veto or whatever this may be is just, for me, totally unacceptable. And I'd like to ask you.
Can I
Sure.
because I got to run to another meeting.
Yeah, please.
The issue is they already have that authority. So whether you want them to or not, it's just that at a delayed point, they're going to hit your general fund if you approve something that they don't agree with. And so
Well,
they already have that authority.
Yeah, in one sense they do, but on the other hand, I'd like to appreciate the fact of our responsibilities with our airport, and there needs to be better relationships with the FAA, but in no way, shape, or form do I want to get their concurrence or agreement or permission, because I'm afraid that will delay
No,
timetables
you
and
have to
projects.
get it. That's the whole issue. You
Well,
must
then,
get it.
Explain to me your sensing of what the FAA's role is and what it should be and what you think this motion might do. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Councilman. Ultimately, the FAA makes the call, but as you point out, they're not in the business of giving a pre-clearance on everything we do. And before you arrived, we talked about 98, maybe 90%, 99% of the services are very clear whether they're permissible or not. It's really a minute area that's gray, that's subject to interpretation.
Very expensive, minute area.
I'd like to know
There's no
the expensiveness. What, in our experience
20
with
million.
them?
Right now, we're paying
Explain
back.
that 20 million.
Basically, we had a situation in which we put forth a program where LA Inc. was going to be a part of the airport and produce basically, I guess,
Marketing. It was a marketing.
a marketing approach for the city of LA.
Yeah, I'm familiar
And
with
it
that.
was spent.
Yeah.
The dilemma was, years later, the FAA says you can highlight and market your airport,
But not the
but
destination.
not the city of Los Angeles.
really-
So we're paying back $20 million, $2 million a year for 10 years.
Yeah. No, I understand that particular issue, and obviously the issue developed historically over a period of many years, and it was a misinterpretation, misimpression. And frankly, if I had the energy, I'd take on the FAA and their definition of what they cover and shouldn't cover. Who are they anyhow? They're just hired guns by the
I hope
policymakers
they're
in
not
Washington.
listening.
Well,
No, I hope they are listening.
know.
That's how much I feel about the
know.
FAA.
I feel the
Well,
same way
let me
about
ask
the
a tough
state-
question,
state
Bernard.
lands
Let me
commission.
ask
I
a
feel
tough
the same
question.
way.
You were a general manager.
I feel
A lot
the
of this,
same about state
a lot of this type of arrangement started in the Reardon administration of how they did fiscal policy of trying to get departments to pay back on those
Right.
issues there.
Right.
And then it continued up to this time where finally it came to be. How do you see it differently from the chair you sat on Los Angeles Street to the chair you sit now?
Well, the thing is that we were never in a situation to creatively generate revenue. But clearly, sitting whatever seat, you knew that a lot of these things were dealing with taking money out of the proprietaries to get them into the general fund. Now, how well you crafted that is something in which you either pay it back later, when you're gone, somebody's paying it back, or it's an approved program. All we're saying is, before you take on these multi-million-dollar programs,
Right.
tens of millions of dollars,
Right,
protect the general fund,
Right.
because that's where you're going to pay it back
Right.
from.
right.
And so the issue is when they spent that money for LA Inc. to do all of this programming and stuff, the general fund didn't get any great benefit. It didn't come to the general fund. It went to them. We're paying it back because it's an ineligible cost.
But it was a tax from
True.
our hotels,
Right, I
not a
was gonna
tax
say-
from them. It wasn't
I mean,
their
but-
money.
And that point is arguable because I know I always use the statistic that a 4% increase in tourism equals $12 million to our general fund.
Yeah.
So the tourism dollars actually do come to our general fund, so that could be debated.
But just think of the 20 million you're paying back
Yeah.
in the short period of the program.
Right.
So whatever you increased over that period, you're paying it back in some
Over 10
substantial.
years.
Let me
Over
just
10.
interact one more time on this.
Yeah.
We're spending billions of dollars on modernizing LAX. Okay, billions. And 20 million, and it's controversial to begin with. I think the FAA is absolutely wrong and out of line, and I would not let that be a precedent for us to give them any more opportunity to meddle in our affairs. The less the FAA is involved with our spending of money and our involvement, the happier I am. That particular 20 million was over a period of time. I would more than happy sit down with the FAA and get appreciation of their policies, as directed by the House of Representatives and the administration, because they are our building and safety on a national level. They don't make policy, they're the ones who enforce policy. And frankly, if I had been in a different position here, I would have taken on the FAA over that $20 million and fought it all the way to Henry Waxman, who sits in Washington on those oversight committees, or the Congress member from the South Bay who also sits on it. I frankly think that as an example, to give them more opportunities to meddle, more opportunities to slow things down, more opportunities to be empowered, when I don't really think they have that opportunity and shouldn't have that opportunity.
Well, let me just say that I hear you, but I hear Councilmember Parks as well, and I know from my work at the harbor, the fact is these agencies do meddle. They do have the last say on how port revenue and airport revenue is spent. So maybe we can get to where I think we all want to get to, which is a better understanding, a more clear, precise understanding of currently, until you go to Congress or I become lieutenant governor, and we sit on these commissions. Until then, we need a clearer understanding of their restrictions on how airport revenue is spent. And do you think you could put into place some financial procedures and guidelines before we spend this money, before we approve the contract on the city council, that will give us a little more assurance, a lot more assurance, that in fact we are appropriately entering into these contracts? That's all we're asking for. I agree with that. Nobody wants to pay this money back. Unfortunately, now they do have the last say. So short of asking for their approval before we do something, is there something that will give the council assurances, ironclad assurances that what we're entering into will indeed be admissible under the FAA guidelines? Is that something you think you can put together?
I believe we understand clearly the intent.
Right.
Councilman Parks'
Right.
intent. You're looking for a belt and suspender, a
Yes.
double assurance.
Yes.
We'll be happy to work
Your
with the CLA CAO.
checklist.
Develop a policy and a proposal. And
Why don't
come
we
back
look
to
at
you.
that when it comes
Don't
back?
put the CAO or the CLA.
Yes,
They-
I have
They
that.
have to give
I
some.
direct the CAO and the CLA to work with LAWA to prepare these guidelines and this.
They have to have guidelines
Right.
in their operation
Right.
also.
Right. Let's look at that and see if that gets us closer to where you want to get.
But we just have to make sure that.
I agree.
Because the CAO, in behalf of the city, is normally the one that's.
Got
going
it.
to deal.
Got it.
Thanks.
Thank you for actually bringing this forward. I think it's important. Okay. Anybody else want to speak on that?
I just want to make sure that in your direction
Yes.
that LAWA has, this in no way will tie our hands, is my issue here with the FAA.
No. This will
will
prepare.
not.
It will not. We will not be seeking pre-approval because it is impractical to.
And when we seek pre-approval, which is sensible, so we don't get into the situation where there wasn't clarity enough, and I blame that lack of clarity on the FAA. I blame it on those pit bulls, not on our local leadership here, historic leadership here. And that was Reardon and Hahn and Villaraigosa. But
And Mr. Bradley.
And Mr. Bradley, too, yeah, of course. So as long as when you bring it back, we continue to have a sense of our role in this.
Well, I think, for instance, when in the future, if there is a new program or something a little off the ordinary track, when it comes to this committee, and our CAO says we recommend that you do this, I think Councilmember Parks, as well as us, we want them, the CAO, to be very aware of the financial procedures and guidelines that we believe almost, 100% that the FAA will be okay with. That's what we want. So,
We get it.
when do you think you can bring those? And those, of course, will have to go to the Board of Airport Commissioners, but we want to see those. We'll hold this in committee. 30 days?
No, longer than that, because you want to
Yeah,
take
you
it
need that
before the...
research, but I say 60 days.
Okay, 60 days.
60 days.
You gotta cancel some meetings because of the budget, if possible.
Right.
And
That'll
if you
work
need
for
more
us.
time, you can come back
Right.
and ask us.
We think
Yeah.
we can come back in 60
Right.
days.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody wishing to address this esteemed committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned.